This is Michael Smook for YouTube Talks, episode 17. The topic of today's conversation is Strong Friendships, Different Politics. Today is August 1st. It's a Tuesday. We're in the year 2017, and I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills. Forest Hills is in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York. In this talk today, Strong Friendships, Different Politics, I'll talk to you about my philosophy of life and my politics. And I'll also talk to you about Republicans who I admire and what Ronald Reagan got right. And then I'll talk to you about what the Democrats have done well in terms of raising taxes and bailing out Mexico. And then in conclusion, I'll speak to you about conversations I've had with friends who voted for our 45th President of the United States. They're supportive of him, and they asked my opinion as to what he can do so the next 3.5 years are truly remarkable. And then at conclusion, I'll speak to you about a dream that I had the day after he was inaugurated and what our conversation was. So stay with me and let's move forward together. In terms of my philosophy really ties into something that happened to me 3.5 years ago. I had a near-death experience, and what I learned from that is that, I learned a lot, and one of the things I learned was that listening is a much underappreciated communication skill. And every day I tell myself the same thing. I have to tell it to myself every day because I forget. I tell myself, talk less, listen more, ask thoughtful questions. In addition, what I tell myself is in any communication I have with anyone, it's far less important that they think I'm smart, funny, or if we disagree about anything, including politics, that I'm right. It's far less important. It's far more important that my counterpart walks away in a conversation feeling that I've listened to them and they feel respected. So what this does is it opens up my whole mind. I'm a much better listener, and I make more thoughtful remarks, and I can understand what people are saying to me, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. Now, in terms of my politics, I was asked before my first and second YouTube talks, I was asked, what's my philosophy? And I said, it goes further back than Thomas Jefferson and John Locke. It goes back 3,500 years. This is my philosophy. I channel my inner biblical Joseph. Joseph was a man. He was imprisoned, but he was able to free himself because he could interpret dreams. He had the gift of prophecy, and he was a terrific prime minister. So really this helps the way I look at life and the way I look at politics. This is the way I think. I say hope for the best, expect the worst, and try to have a plan B and a plan C lined up. And that's my philosophy as it relates to politics. This is a biblical figure 3,500 years ago, but he could have been the world's first economist, and he's somebody who I channel when I'm thinking about what's best in terms of politics. Also, in terms of in a nutshell, what do I think about politics, policy, economics, and governing? I believe the United States, we've had a good 7 or 8 years, but we need to strengthen the middle class and expand it to low-income people. And so, as stated in previous YouTube talks, I think what the United States needs to do is we need to walk back and re-embrace free trade agreements. Secondly, what we need to do is we need to start an infrastructure rebuilding process. Let's start small, and then after successes, we can think about robust planning, funding, and implementation. We could borrow from the New Deal Democrats and Gray Society, shovel-ready programs, or we could take the more Republican approach, competitive sealed bids, sole source contracts, or even block grants. But let's rebuild the country. Roads, bridges, lead-laced pipes poisoning our kids in Flint, Michigan, and mass transportation, and so much more. So that's my politics in a nutshell. Now let's move on to Now let's move on to Republicans that I admire and what Ronald Reagan got right. Republicans I admire. Brent Scowcroft is somebody. He was an expert at foreign affairs, at intelligence, at defense. He understood global economics, and he was an incrementalist. He was a Washingtonian, which he believed the power of Washington, D.C. He believed that our partners and sometimes rivals like China and Russia, those relationships needed to be managed. And we weren't. It was no victors, no vanquished. He believed these relations, everybody gets respect, and these relationships needed to be managed. And he was a sober, solid, centrist Republican, an Eisenhower-Nixon Republican who worked for George W. Bush, Richard Nixon, and in between all that, Gerald Ford. Another Republican I really admire is Colin Powell. Colin Powell believed that if we're going to get into a fight, a military conflict, we needed to have an entrance strategy whereby the American people will be behind the politicians and our military, and that we needed to come in with overwhelming force, and we needed to have an exit strategy. So Colin Powell, it's called the Powell Doctrine, and he's a Republican I greatly admire. In terms of Ronald Reagan, well, his politics are different than mine, but the thing is, Reagan kept it simple and sweet. He said he was going to cut taxes and get government off our backs in terms of regulation, so the capitalist system would work and businesses, large and small, would be energized. And he also said he was going to increase defense spending so we could challenge, this was the days of communism, we could challenge the Soviet Union, and he said he was going to balance the budget. Now, I was not in favor of all these politics, but what I admire is he kept it simple and stuck to it. And what I really like about him is that Ronald Reagan was not the kind of man who was going to take stacks of briefing books and go back to Camp David and read them all weekend and understand the nuances of different kind of policies. What he was going to do, he assigned to run the Oval Office James Baker, Ed Meese, Michael Deaver as his chief of staff and deputy chiefs of staff, and they had people working for them. And Reagan had people running the Oval Office, and they were sharp, and they knew what he wanted to do, and they understood the direction he wanted to go in. And in addition, Reagan had a pretty good cabinet. Shultz as Secretary of State, Weinberger in Defense, David Stockman crunching the budget numbers. So he had a really good first team in there, and those are some of the things that I really admire Reagan. And he and also people underestimated him. He was president of the Screen Actors Guild, which gave him administrative experience, and then for 8 years governor of the state of California. So he realized he had to make peace with the people who were his political rivals and sometimes enemies, Democrats. So Reagan understood that sometimes he had to compromise, and that's what I admire about Ronald Reagan. What do I admire about Democrats, and what did they get right? Well, Bill Clinton did something. It sounds counterintuitive, but in 1993 he raised taxes on corporations and the rich, and he had problems getting Congress behind him. But he talked Bob Kerrey into being the 50th vote. It was a 50-50 tie, and then Al Gore broke the tie. So the Republicans said, "You're crazy. We're going to have a recession. You're increasing taxes," and what happened is we had budget surpluses in the second 4 years. And also, the Republicans refused to bail out Mexico. Mexico's 120 million people, and they were going bankrupt. And the Republicans sat on their hands, and they filibustered, and they refused to appropriate funds to help Mexico. So this is what Clinton did. He had access and authorization and funding for a fund, and he lent between $10 and $15 billion to Mexico. And within several years, Mexico paid off all the loans. The equity markets, the stock market in Mexico settled down, and Mexico was able to right its economic shift. And so Clinton fought against the Republicans who were against him. Republicans think they're strong in the economy, and frequently they are. And in these occasions, with increasing taxes on the rich and corporations and the Mexican bailout. They were wrong, and that's what I admire about Clinton. He was right on two policies related to economics, and that's why the Democrats are sometimes right, and that's what I admired about Clinton. Now, let's talk about our 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. I'm flattered. I have friends who, a number of friends who voted for the president, and what's really flattering is that they know that I'm moderate in tone, and I'm a solid, sober centrist in my philosophy. And on more than one occasion, I've been asked, Michael, the president has had 6 bumpy months, and we'd like to see the next 3.5 years go well. They know I'm a Democrat, and frankly, I voted for the Democrat, and I didn't vote. Of course, I didn't vote for him. And they said, well, the news media is really rough on him. What do you think? And I said, look, every Democrat who's been in office since I was president, especially Johnson, Carter, Clinton, and Obama, they have had a rough time from the press. So even though the Republicans like to say the press is filled with liberals and Democrats, all Democrat presidents are trying to control the news cycle. They want favorable opinion through the fourth estate known as the media. So I said, look, President Trump should just take a deep breath, throw away his cell phone and his Twitter account, and stop thinking as the press is the enemy. Because every president, Democrat or Republican, has had problems with the press. And there are many things we could say on behalf of a free press, but time prevents me from going into those details. Let me go through the other questions that I was asked. I was told, where can we get, by my friends, they said, look, we can't read good news about the president. Where can we get that? I said, look, don't go to Breitbart News on the internet. Look, I read the New York Times. It's great. But if you want a more conservative viewpoint, read the Wall Street Journal. Read both papers. So that's what I advised them. Then the third question was some friends asked. They said, the president's having a rough time with health care. What can he do? And I said, look, Bill Clinton made a mistake of asking his wife to run the healthcare initiative, and it was horrible. It came out badly, and he was defeated, and it was looked upon as a big defeat for him. And what he did was he found a small victory. He approached Nancy Kassebaum, a Republican from Kansas, and Ted Kennedy, liberal from Massachusetts, and he got them to combine with the Kennedy-Kassebaum bill, and they came up with something called Child Health Plus. Low-income kids not eligible for Medicaid would get health care insurance, and that is still in place today. And so what Clinton did is he may have crashed and burned in his initiative with health care, but he came up with a victory with Child Health Plus, and it was not a huge victory. It was a small to medium-sized victory, but he learned from his experience, and he partnered with Democrats and Republicans and came away a winner. So then I was asked, well, Michael, what else can the president do? What would you advise President Trump to do? And I would say, look, the man owns the phrase, art of the deal. What's the ultimate deal? The ultimate deal is trade relations with China and nuclear security with North Korea. They said, how does he do that? I said, look, he needs to walk back and re-embrace the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That means that the United States, Japan, South Korea are new trading partners in Vietnam. It's 12 nations overall. It's 40% of the world's economic output. So he needs to re-embrace the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and somewhere down the line, 6 to 12 months, with that working, he will be able to go to China. He will be able to negotiate more favorable trade agreements, and he will be able to have more leverage with China managing the North Korea situation. North Korea is trying to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have it loaded with a nuclear warhead, but that's very destabilizing and an existential threat to the United States. So I think that President Trump as owner of the art of the deal, this will wipe out all the negative publicity President Trump has had the last 6 months. If 6, 12, 18 months from now, he's able to negotiate re-embracing Trans-Pacific Partnership, negotiating better trade relations with China, and nuclear security with North Korea, he'll win big. He'll win big in 3.5 years when he runs for president again, and he'll be looked upon as a hero. I mean, this is a man I voted against. I might have vote against him again, but frankly, I'm a patriotic American. I care dearly, truly, and deeply what happens in this country. So if he's listening to this video and he listens to me, that's fine. So now let me summarize, or let me conclude. I had a dream about the president, and it was on January 21st, 2017. He was inaugurated the day before. And suddenly I'm dreaming, and I'm very polite. I'm surprisingly polite. It's my unconscious. I could have been yelling at the man. I was polite. And I said, look, you have arguably the most important job in the world. You're a very busy man, and our politics differ. So look, if you want to talk, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, or if you're too busy, that's okay. But you know, he's 6'3". I'm 5'8". He's sitting on the bench of a picnic table, so he's looking. By sitting down, he's looking at me right in the eye while I'm standing up, and we're on the grounds of the White House. So what happened was, after I said what I just said I was going to say, I said that to him, and I waited for his response. And what happened was, we have a new cat. He's a kitten, and he has nails that feel like razor blades. And suddenly I feel his nails raking across my chest, and it woke me up just as the president, Donald Trump, was ready to respond to me. And so I never got to hear him respond to me. So when I woke up, I made myself a cup of coffee, and I thought about it, and I finished the dream while I was fully awake. And what the president did after I said what I said was, he smiled at me, he clapped his hands, and he gave me the big thumbs up sign. And then he walked away. He didn't say anything. So that was our conversation. And that was my conversation with the President of the United States during a dream and when I finished the dream. So I've said just about everything I need to say, but let me wrap it up right now. My name is Michael Smook. We're on YouTube, Facebook, and sometimes Vimeo. This is episode 17. The topic of today's conversation is strong friendships, different politics. Today is August 1st. It's a Tuesday. It's the year 2017. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. It's in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York, of course. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.